So I just finished Doom Patrol episode 1, and that I honestly think they just knocked it out the park. What I just saw was really good. How's it going, guys? Welcome to my Doom Patrol episode 1 review and I guess first impressions of this series. As I said from that intro, this was such a good beginning episode. Seriously, I didn't want to overhype it from what I said in Titans, I think episode 4 Doom Patrol, that backdoor pilot they gave us. Obviously a few things have changed since then, the chief has been recast, etc, etc. I was very excited for this show in February, and here we are, it is here. And I may sound very overexcitable, but like I am absolutely so happy with that first episode. It was crazy, it was wacky, it took the piss out of itself, it was comic booky, and they nailed it. Something so ambitious, I feel, landed perfectly on their feet. And not only just that, but they landed running. I can't praise this enough. Now, I think what made me so happy is that, you know, it kept the familiar kind of feeling we had in Titans, but expanded upon it further, obviously because it's its own show now and that's what we're watching. But really, what I liked about this episode right off the bat is that it introduced you to each character. It was initially set before the Titans episode, and it wanted you to get to feel for each character, because in case you didn't know already, I'm not a massive, wildly knowledgeable person or versed in the Doom Patrol comics. I've only read a few on DCUniverse, and just for other research, like essentially these are, whether you want to compare them to the mutants of Marvel in DC or the Guardians of the Galaxy banded together, they are, as Mr. Nobody narrates the beginning of this episode, another superhero show? No, like really you're watching a bunch of super zeros, a bunch of losers, a bunch of freaks banded together to bring together this superhero force, the Doom Patrol, and that I think is what I like. I've always said this before as well, it appeals to me when you get the outcast kind of teams that come together, mixed in with comedy, but yet I think that's the perfect blend, at least for me, like mixing in the superheroes, the tragic story, the backgrounds, the sincerity to the characters, yet comic book wacky wild adventures. That is Doom Patrol, all in a tea. But right off the bat, it has a really cool intro. Normally Titans, if you compare it to that, it's like dun 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 dun. It's straight away into the show. But this has more one of those, and I don't want to trigger anybody by saying this comparison, but more of those Marvel kind of Netflix intros, a really well thought out, interesting intro. But other than that, as I briefly mentioned a second ago, it starts off with Paraguay 1948, and this is Mr. Nobody's origin. Now, if you didn't already know, Mr. Nobody is the season 1 villain, played by Alan Tudyk, and he was very good this episode. Did a really good job at giving you the impression, the viewer, that Mr. Morden isn't all there to begin with, or is just, quite desperate to get these enhancements, shall we say, off this Nazi scientist. So he goes through with that. I believe it's the White Room in the comics. I feel like for the most part in this episode, they did everyone's origins pretty well, with minor differences in a couple of them. But essentially, you see him split and become Mr. Nobody, and already, things are off to a great start. But then we have Brendan Fraser's time in the episode. Well, I feel like Robotman, aka Cliff Steele's character in this episode was predominantly the main focus, just the underlying focus throughout. Now, he is my favorite character out of the Titans episode, and this episode in Doom Patrol reaffirms that for me. Now, the way they have Brendan Fraser's Cliff Steele is that he's a bit of a jackass. Like, I love the twists and turns they do with the origin stories throughout this episode. So, for example, as I just mentioned, he's a bit of a douche of a human in terms of, like, he got kind of big and famous, he drinks, he cheats on his wife, this, that, and the other, but he has a family, tries to keep it a bit masked from the family, but at the end of the day, he's not living his best self, to put it quite bluntly. You see the continuous flashbacks to his racing driver days. He was quite a big name for himself and all of that. But then you see how he wakes up into Robotman. You see even the chief looking at how to even weld, which made me laugh. Like, he's welding together Cliff Steele's brain and this Robotman, and he doesn't necessarily know how or what he's doing. It's something about the chief anyway. As much as he kind of cares, it's more about the scientific kick he gets out of fixing all of these individual people that we're about to talk about, or that we see in this episode. Now, Doom Patrol really is that kind of mature rating episode that you get to see, like, Brendan Fraser's ass. You get to see him doing things with a certain lady behind his wife's back and all of that stuff. This is what I mean, and while some people might find that distasteful or whatever, I personally love seeing all of this kind of stuff in an episode. For me, it just really brings it down to earth, makes it a lot more adult, and it chucks a lot of more stuff in there that I feel improves the quality of the episode in just a more raw, gritty way throughout in other areas too, whether that's just swearing. Basically what I'm trying to say is they don't really hold back, and I feel like that suits DC very well. But not only does it like suit DC well, they found the perfect group of people to nail that mature rating tag too, the Doom Patrol people. I mean, some people found the mature Titans vibe a little bit distasteful, whether that's Dick Grayson's this or that, or violence, or blah blah blah, superheroes shouldn't be saying fuck or whatever. Doom Patrol suits it perfectly. But as I said, whilst they give you like an initial origin, they twist things up a couple of times throughout whilst they expand upon Robotman's character. Even though you think he's a bit of a douche at first, it makes you feel for him. This is a guy who can't feel pain. This is a guy who got disconnected from his wife, his kid. And I just really love the way they kind of unfolded the story throughout the episode, piece by piece by piece. And, you know, whatever you think about Brendan Fraser, I feel like he did a brilliant job, not only through the voiceover, but his flashbacks as Cliff Steele as well. Now, just talking about Doom Manor for a second, that is where the Doom Patrol are staying, like in Doom Manor. And I just love throughout the episode as well how the characters interact with each other. For example, when Cliff Steele first wakes up, you're greeted by Rita, aka Elasti-Girl. And, you know, you've got Negative Man as well, looking after him. And these are, as I said, these are all outcasts. These are all people with their own individual problems. And it's just interesting to see how they kind of develop the relationships throughout the episode. And I feel like even though Robotman wasn't necessarily there in the beginning, I feel like he overall is kind of a dad figure, especially when you bring it forward to kind of present day in Titans, how he kind of looked after Beast Boy, or like he was kind of a father figure to him. I felt like the same kind of vibe came across when he was talking to Crazy Jane this episode. Now, Larry Trainer, aka Negative Man, he was a test pilot. He, you know, ran in some negative energy in the sky, and that thus, you know, shorted out his plane, and he kind of walked out of it burnt to a crisp, but with this like negative energy inside him. You actually even see a cool little preview of that way before you even see his origin in the episode, as you see like the years go by for Cliff Steele at the beginning. Essentially, each origin in this episode is from, each character should I say, is plucked from different points in time. Somehow their abilities, each ability of each person, coincidentally doesn't allow them to age. For example, at least not visibly. For example, Elasti-Girl still seems to be the same age. Robotman is just a brain, so that's the self-explanatory one. And Larry Trainer, aka Negative Man, you know, seems to be, or that negative energy somehow keeps his body ageless as well. Now, Rita's origin is similar to the clip they showed in that Titans Doom Patrol episode. She was an actress. She loved being an actress. She had a bit of an ego going. She still does. She still loves talking about herself or watching her own movies. But yet again, we saw a similar scene like what we saw in Titans, where she fell off the dock, and then that kind of like entity energy stuff went in her, and thus gave her abilities. But they skipped out on what else we saw in Titans, where, well, they showed her walking away. Obviously, everyone was freaking out after they saw her skin drooping and stuff like that. But I'm pretty sure before the Chief found her, she spent quite a bit of time in a psychiatric place, or like an asylum, because, you know, back in those days in the 50s, it probably seems... you can assume that if somebody saw you like that, they would lock you up and blah, blah, blah. And I'm guessing that's when the Chief went and found her and gave her a place at Doom Manor. But as I said, going into this, I knew a little bit about everyone's origin, but I feel like if you don't know anything, it's even better. I was even pleasantly surprised as well going throughout it, because you get introduced to the origins, and then, you know, you think Cliff Steele's family is dead, but then you find out the Chief has actually kind of been hiding a little bit from him. Like, you kind of see Robotman find more and more and more about himself, because naturally transitioning your brain from a human body into a robot shell, shall we say, you know, will have some problems. Like, he hasn't got all his memories, he doesn't know what really happened, and it turns out he didn't actually die or not die, but, you know, caused that accident on the racing track. It was actually when he carried on that life, he dodged all of that, he carried on his life of drinking and not really being there for his family, just douchey version of Brendan Fraser, right? But then he starts to turn it around. He rings his wife saying, don't know how he got here, and this is what I mean. You see him kind of start this redemptive arc with his family. They go off in a car. They're probably going to drive somewhere new, start a new life or whatever. And that is when he, you know, recklessly just looks the other way. It's his daughter's birthday in a few days. And then all of a sudden, bang, the car just goes straight. Well, the top of the car gets completely sawn off. And, you know, you can only imagine how graphic that is. And I was quite surprised. As I said, I know they're pushing for the M rating, but man, you saw like his daughter, the wife, like not everything in detail, but enough to make you think, oh shit, like quite literally. Now after Cliff still realizes this, he is pretty kind of hollow, but this still isn't the end of his story in terms of realizing stuff. You eventually learn in the episode that the chief has hidden stuff from him. Like, this is the thing. The chief is a complicated character. It's like, do you like him? Is he doing things that are wrong? Naturally, he's helped all these people, right? But then again, this isn't everything to him. There's some stuff behind the doors that is unethical. Like, he's not necessarily doing this for them, but probably for his own scientific kick. That's really what compels him and gives him this drive to help people. It's really helping himself. But then he reveals, well, he finds out through Crazy Jane that the daughter is still alive. This is when they go into town. I'm talking a bit back and forth here, but his daughter is still alive, and this causes even further issues. It's like, why didn't you tell me this? You restricted my right to get to know my daughter. And he's like, they wouldn't have accepted you. It's a bit complicated, but I think a lot more secrets obviously are going to come out this season with the chief and how he knows Mr. Nobody and stuff like that. Especially towards the end of this episode, because they went into town, they have attracted Mr. Nobody to it, which is somebody who the chief is evidently kind of hiding from. Before we get into the part when Chief goes away for a couple of days and they all go into town, after really not going into town for many years for each Doom Patrol member, we're introduced to Crazy Jane. Now, I completely disagree with whoever, I'm not going to mention any names, calls this character annoying. I think her performance was amazing. Now, if you didn't already know, but I'm trusting you've already watched the episode, if you're watching this review maybe, I don't know. Crazy Jane has multiple personalities. Each one comes with its own power. I can't remember if in the comics she has more than what the show is saying she has, but in the show she has 64 different personalities, with each one having its own power. It's demonstrated really hilariously throughout this episode. I honestly think Diane Guerrero, I think her name is, did an amazing job, honestly, to shift personalities, like from a nice, like Jane is nice, but then I believe she went into other personalities like Sylvia, who has this really creep demonic voice, and then the next second she was Hammerhead, who was being a complete dick to Cliff Steele, which you just feel really like sorry for Cliff Steele, and then you're just thinking Crazy Jane, you're just a dick, but then you realize another personality comes out of nowhere. I'm really looking forward to her character this season. I think it's going to offer so many cool moments. I mean, for example, it was her idea to go into town, so I feel like there are going to be a lot more moments introduced, or a lot more troubling moments introduced because of Crazy Jane. I mean, there was even this one moment in town where Rita was rolling down the street because things started to go a bit wrong for her, and then she activated this other personality where she almost became this Ant-Man like firestorm moment, and then Cliff Steele was like, yeah, you probably shouldn't do that. I don't know, this is what I mean about this show. There's so many aspects to it that are so unpredictable but crazily good that you don't know what's going to come, but you know it's probably going to be pretty amazing. So as I said, the chief kind of leaves Doom Manor for a couple of days. It's been, I think, a long time since he last did that. I assume he goes out to see if there's any more people he can save and stuff like that. That's what his main kind of thing is, right? And this is giving them the opportunity to kind of do what they want. So Robotman is like, sure, I'm going to go after Crazy Jane proposes going into town. Then Rita's just like not necessarily sure about it. Negative Man is like probably the most responsible one and only went along with them to make sure nothing went wrong. And as things start off very well in town, for example, Rita's like talking to a waitress in a diner who recognizes, or at least thinks she looks just like the star Rita back in the 50s, so she's having a good time. Negative Man obviously walks into a bar, everyone's staring at him, but you know, I guess he's having his own time drinking a beer. Kind of felt sorry for him there. And then Robotman and Crazy Jane, they're just smoking a doob like down in town. And just slowly things start to unfold and go very wrong. And this kind of kicks off the series because as Rita is rolling down the street, causing destruction and everything like that, this does get the attention of Mr. Nobody, and that causes the chief to get pretty anxious. And this is the the driving force that kind of creates the Doom Patrol from just people who are surviving after some terrible accident to people who think, oh wait, we can defend and use our powers and our unique abilities to prevent this disastrous force that is coming, even though Chief is like, screw this, let's get out of here and run away. The effects were really, really good. I mean, perfectly acceptable for TV or like streaming platformy types. If not, I would say really above average. Obviously Rita is probably the most debatable one because he's like a little blob of stuff, or like when she starts melting, but as I said, way more than satisfactory in my opinion. Negative Man's energy when it comes out of him, I think that's absolutely fine. I think the production on this show and the way it's filmed and everything like that is really, 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 really good. That's the first thing I actually thought in the first 10 minutes of the show. I thought, man, the way this is filmed, the way the costumes and everything are, the way Robotman looks, you would have thought that would look kind of tacky, but it is pulled off very, very, very well. I do want to say as well, Timothy Dalton, I really am happy that they recasted the Chief to him, because I just imagined in my head, if you guys have seen the Titans episode of Doom Patrol, that Chief being in this episode, and I really don't feel like he just wouldn't have had the same charismatic, kind of caring yet ability than what Timothy does, for example. The one they had in Doom Patrol was a bit more, I feel like he definitely gave across the more manipulative, kind of stern Chief, if that makes sense, whereas Timothy Dalton's Chief seems more caring, but I feel like that's better because really underneath, as I keep mentioning, there's a lot more to him than meets the eye. And the way the ending happened, and I keep saying this is such a comic book wacky show in such a good way to put that term, is that a freaking like donkey is there at the end. He farts out a message saying the mind is a limit, and if that doesn't explain how wacky this is, but pulling it off exceptionally well, then I do not know what else does. But the interesting thing is that they included that Chief kind of knew Mr. Nobody was coming, and that's when we saw Mr. Nobody in the Doom Patrol bus. And as I said, I'm really, really liking Alan Tudyk's Mr. Nobody. Like, I feel like the way he's done, the effects are very, very good, but I imagine if we saw him behind the scenes, it would be like a load of green over his body. It must be a really cheap way of doing it, essentially, but the way they've done it is you couldn't complain. As I said, if anything, it's actually really well done, because if you see him in the comics, you think, oh wait, how are they going to kind of make him look two-dimensional, yet cut bits off him and have him like seeping at the cracks? They did it, and they did it really well, but I reckon they did it kind of like low budget, if that makes sense. Now, I could be wrong here. Maybe one of you guys who have been very, very versed in the comics, maybe. But either way, TV shows do kind of offer a little manipulation on the story to make it interesting for existing fans. I think Chief may have something to do with Mr. Nobody's experiment way back when he went to go see the secret Nazi ex-scientist. And I'm definitely not saying Chief is that freaking scientist. Like, that guy was old kind of as he was back then, but maybe he learned under him. Maybe, I mean, Chief experiments and knows a lot himself, so he has to have something to do with it, I think. But Mr. Nobody loves what he's become, so it's going to be really interesting to see why he knows Chief, how he knows Chief, and everything like that. But either way, the stuff that Mr. Nobody was kind of creating in the town was absolutely crazy. Now, from what I know, is that Mr. Nobody can like essentially take the sanity away from you, would kind of drive you insane. The powers they kind of introduced at the end of this episode were a lot more than that. I feel like the singularity was, a black hole was being sucked into the ground and everything was falling into it. Things are getting wacky and wackier by the minute, and I'm just like, oh my god, I love this. Oh my god, how are they going to handle this? This is just perfect. So I feel like they may be adding additional powers. I could be wrong, but maybe this is in everybody's perception. I thought that for a second. Maybe these things aren't happening, but I would probably say they are. Maybe they're just adding more interdimensionally kind of abilities to Mr. Nobody than what we initially expected, or maybe just what I expected. But it definitely gives you the impression that Mr. Nobody is overpowered, but in a good way. It's just like, how are the Doom Patrol going to handle this one? Really setting up essentially the rest of the season. I think there's 15 episodes, and as I said, this episode was probably one of the best premiering episodes I've actually ever seen in comic book TV. Now, I do not want anyone to say, oh, you must be over-exaggerating, Bo, but I'm seriously not. Like, this is so up my street, and it gave me such good impression. I just hope they can keep it up from here on out. Now, if you've got this far in the video, thank you, but you may be wondering, Boba, why haven't you talked about Cyborg yet? Where is Cyborg? Is he going to be in the show? I thought I saw him in the trailer. He is, but I think he's coming next episode. Comes to them with a mission. Maybe it might not be strictly to do with Mr. Nobody. Maybe that's going to be something that continues throughout the season, like as the overarching thing, but maybe there's something else that Cyborg comes with them about. Maybe it is to do with Mr. Nobody. We're going to have to wait and see. Very looking forward to Cyborg's introduction and seeing what the dynamic with the team is like with him involved, because, you know, he had his own accident and became Cyborg kind of thing. Didn't want to become Cyborg. So he's going to fit in pretty well, I think, especially with the humor we kind of got from the trailers. But other than that, guys, I'm just going to give this like such a high rating. I don't want to give it a number, but it's amazing. I'm looking forward to exploring more of the characters. I feel like they set up every character perfectly in this beginning. So interested in Crazy Jane, especially Robotman. But I would love to know what you guys thought of this episode down in the comments below. I know this was a bit rambly, but this episode was like 57 minutes long, and it was impossible to talk about every little thing that happened, but I trust that I've given you an overall blabbery impression of this show. If I love it this much, hopefully you can at least enjoy it a little bit, if not more, maybe as much as me. But other than that, guys, like this video if you did enjoy it. Subscribe for more Doom Patrol reviews just like this. I will definitely be doing them week to week. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day. I definitely need a name for you guys. Doom Patrolians, Doom Patrol members, the Patrol. I don't know. See you in the next video. Goodbye.